Great. Thank you all for coming very much to celebrate Reid Pauly's new book, The Art of Coercion, Credible Threats and the Assurance Dilemma. Copies available.
Thank you.
Copies available for sale and signage outside the door. Thank you all, like I say, for coming. And I'm Rose McDermott. I'm moderating this, which means I'll go as quickly as possible. But we'll begin with some comments from our author, Reid Pauly, who's an assistant professor here. And some of you may actually be in his nuclear politics class at the moment. I see some of my people who otherwise would be in my American foreign policy class at this time here now. So thank you for that. And then we'll have three sets of commentaries. The first from Charlie Glazer, who's a senior fellow at the MIT Security Studies program. I guess Kelly's going next. Kelly Greenhill, associate professor of political science at Tufts. And Stacey Goddard, the Betty Freihoff Johnson, 44, professor of political science at Wellesley. After which there may be some back and forth comments to each other. And then we'll open up the room for questions and I'll moderate those questions. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our author, Reid Pauly.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks to the students. Thank you to the panelists for making the trip down to Brown. Thanks to Rose for chairing. There are a lot of emotions at a book launch. This is my first, so I'm feeling them for the first time.
Many more to come.
There's more to come, I hope. There's a lot of joy. There's a lot of relief that it's finished. Sometimes you think about qualms about things you should have included that you left on the cutting room floor. But mostly there's gratitude because it takes a lot of people to get any book out. It took a lot of people to help me to get to this stage. And so it's a joy to kind of reflect on them. But there's too many, of course, to name here. It was a joy to reflect on them in the book, but then sort of realize that it is not possible to pay back the debts you owe to the people who have helped you to publish a book. All you can do is pay it forward. So the students in this room are the privilege that I have in paying forward the debts that I owe to people who helped me get here. And so thank you for giving me the privilege of teaching you all. It is my brief task to try and summarize for you a quick sense of what I think this book is about. We may hear other versions of it from the panelists. But at a very basic level in writing this book, I started with the observation that governments like to make threats, often of economic or military punishment of some kind. And this is the practice of coercion, the use of threats to try and bend the world to your will. Yet, governments seem particularly bad at this in international politics. Materially powerful countries like the United States are especially bad at this. They have some of the lowest success rates of coercion. And in some sense, that's an incredible waste, right? Either you're making a bunch of threats that you shouldn't have made in the first place, or you are failing to coercively bargain, and then war is the result, right? Wars that maybe didn't have to happen. And so I wanted to know, big picture, why do coercive demands succeed and when do they fail? And what I encountered is that most often scholars and policymakers have two answers for this. One sort of smaller one is that selection effects explain it. We just tend to see of the observable cases more failures. But the bigger one is that we have an entire body of work about the insufficiency of the credibility or severity of our threats. If only they didn't think we were bluffing, the use of targets of coercion would give in. If only we squeezed them a little bit harder for a little bit longer, then our threats would work. And so we have generations of effort to understand and great work to understand the sources of resolve, right? What makes us come across as resolved as we think we are. And this was unsatisfying to me because all coercive interactions, as my students already know, have three components: a threatened punishment, the use of demand, communicating what behavior the threat is contingent upon, the use of something called a coercive assurance, the use of communicating that the punishment will not be carried out if the demands are met. It's just this contingency principle at the heart of all coercive interactions, that coercion offers a choice. If you comply, I will not punish you. And the choice is up to you. I like to emphasize that it is explicitly not a carrot. If you're using the analogy of carrots and sticks, an assurance is the contingency of the stick, or like the conditionality of the punishment side of the equation. So it does not have to be carrot. I'm not the first person, of course, to recognize this. It's not all that big of a contribution just to say that this exists. But I think this book is in a body of work that's trying to rebalance the field away from the study of threats alone I try and use that as a jumping off point to say why coercive assurance has been underappreciated and why leaders can fail to assure when they coerce. The use of one big reason for that that it tends to be overlooked is that punishing capriciously is supposed to be irrational. The use of coercive assurance should be implied and credible when countries issue threats because it's costly to carry out your threats. So a rational coercer would not punish a target after it complied. The use of focus on this decision tree that just is a complicated way of showing that somebody decides to make a threat or not in international politics. The target gets to decide whether to defy or concede. And if they concede, we assume there's peace, right? Nothing should happen after they concede. It's only if they defy the coercer gets to decide whether I was in fact bluffing or not. The use of, and we forget the use of what is obvious, that targets can have direct fears of unconditional punishment, and they sound like this. The use of, in the midst of a coercive campaign to get him to cooperate with WMD inspectors, Saddam Hussein framed the choice that he saw, as he perceived it in the mid-1990s, to his advisors on tape recordings that we have now of him recording himself, that the choice that Iraq had was either to, quote, have sanctions with inspectors or sanctions without inspectors. He thought he was damned if he did or damned if he didn't. So the book argues that coercers face an assurance dilemma. The actions that coercers take to bolster the credibility of their threats undermine the credibility of their assurances not to punish. And a big reason for this is because in the process of bringing pressure to bear on targets, even rational coercers can lose control over the decision to punish. And targets, in turn, are the ones worth looking at in the empirical record to see how they perceive the punishments, threats made against them. And they are clearly looking for signals to confirm that they will actually be able to avoid punishment. The use of take a calculated risk, if that's the case when they concede. The book examines cases of coercion over nuclear proliferation, non-proliferation coercion in the 4 chapters on apartheid South Africa, Iran, Saddam's Iraq, and Gaddafi's Libya. Just for the last couple of minutes, I want to just give you examples of how this works in these cases of bargaining. The use of first, coercers like to build coalitions, makes good sense, domestic coalitions or international coalitions, to augment the credibility and severity of their threats. And when you do this, every actor in a coalition has their own interests and capabilities and influence. And so a target is wise to ask whether in striking a bargain with you, whether they are going to punish me anyway. And this was clearly an impediment during the negotiation of the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran. It happened both internationally and domestically. Domestically, I'll just give you the example that in order to get Iran to agree at the end of the day, the Obama administration had to negotiate at home with Congress to pass legislation that confirmed its view of the case, which was that it had the executive power to waive by executive order many nuclear-related sanctions, and Congress did not have to pass legislation to do that. They passed instead legislation that approved the use of Obama administration's authority to do so. In constructing these coalitions, states also like to log roll and expand their aims to tie multiple demands to the same threatened punishment. In this way, coercion becomes what the book calls entangled. So targets consider conceding to one demand and then wonder whether they're going to have to face the same punishments just because they didn't concede something else. The clearest example, I think, of this in the book is that in the late 1970s, racist South African policymakers were committed to the apartheid system of the separation of the races in their country, but also had a nuclear program that they wanted to have sanctions over relieved. And they talked to themselves in the documents clearly about how they wished this punishment would go away, but that they perceived the entanglement of these two issues of human rights and nuclear issues. And so they concluded that the acquisition of nuclear weapons will not necessarily isolate South Africa any further. They built, a test shaft underneath this shed here in the desert and constructed the use of nuclear weapons. In the words of their chief nuclear scientists at the time, if I have to take the punishment, I at least want to be guilty. Finally, a target defies coercion if they think that conceding is only going to increase the use of the probability of their punishment. The use of perhaps by revealing to the coercer that their demands were not appropriately calibrated in the first place. The use of, and this is a problem if in making concessions, I am revealing information to you, new information. The use of recordings of Saddam Hussein show clearly that he was terrified of making concessions for this reason because he didn't know exactly whether his coercers would be learning new information. And the chapter shows some interesting politics around sharing knowledge. So Gaddafi came clean only when confronted with intelligence about what exactly coercers already knew, especially the United States, about Libya's nuclear program and their procurement of nuclear technology in the black market. And I just love this quote from National Security Advisor, at the time, National Security Advisor, the Vice President, Jake Sullivan, who told me in an interview that the United States, consciously didn't push Tehran to reveal more than it already knew about its past nuclear weapons program because of the past nuclear weapons research. We knew, and they knew we knew, and we knew that they knew we knew. Overall, the book is just putting some bones on this kind of axiomatic importance of assurance and coercion. I think it's a concept that matters in all manner of cases today, from deterring war over Taiwan to stabilizing the Korean Peninsula to tariffs or whatever the latest threat is to come out of the White House today. And I think there's a lot more work to be done in this space. Hopefully our panelists will tell us about some of that as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you to the panelists, especially.